I heard my own son's voice through my phone speaker, clear, careless, and cruel. "The old bat won't notice," Daniel said, laughing softly as a drawer slid open. I stopped breathing. There was the faint rustle of cash being counted, then Lindsay's voice, low and tense. And just like that, something inside me broke. Not because of the money, but because in that moment I realized my son no longer saw me as his mother, only as something to take from. What he didn't know, I had already seen everything. The hidden camera had been recording long before this, and now I had proof. If this moment made your heart drop the way mine did, take a second to like this video. And if you've ever trusted someone who didn't deserve it, I'd really like to hear your story. Leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Sometimes sharing it out loud is the first step to seeing things clearly. And if you want to follow what happens next, stay with me. My name is Avery Bennett, and I am 68 years old. I used to think that was a number that meant something, wisdom, resilience, a kind of quiet authority earned after a lifetime of loving, losing, and enduring. My husband George used to say that age was like rings in a tree. Every year he'd tell me you grow stronger in ways no one can see. I believed him. We were married for 43 years. We raised our son Daniel in this very house. Every scuffed floorboard, every chipped corner of the kitchen counter holds a memory of him growing up. Birthday parties with store-bought cakes we pretended were homemade. Late-night fevers where George would sit up holding Daniel while I brewed tea and whispered prayers. The first time Daniel left for college, I stood in this living room and cried into George's shoulder, convinced I had lost a piece of myself. George passed away 3 years ago. Heart attack, sudden, final. The house went quiet in a way I still can't describe without feeling it all over again. Silence has weight, you know. It presses against your chest, fills the spaces between your thoughts. For months, I moved through my own home like a guest, careful and sure, afraid of disturbing the life we used to have. Daniel started visiting more often after the funeral. At first, I was grateful. He'd show up with grocery bags, sometimes even cook dinner. He fixed the loose cabinet hinge George had always said he'd get to next weekend. He sat at the kitchen table and asked me if I was sleeping okay, if I needed anything, if I was managing. That word managing felt strange, but I ignored it. Lindsay, his wife, called me more too. Her voice always had that gentle sweetness like honey poured just a little too thick. "We just want to make things easier for you, Avery," she would say. "You've done so much for everyone else your whole life." It sounded kind. It sounded right. And I wanted to believe it. But kindness, I've learned, has a rhythm when it's real. It comes naturally without rehearsal. What Daniel and Lindsay offered me, it felt practiced. Not immediately, not in a way I could point to and say that's wrong, but enough to make something in the back of my mind stir. It started with small things. A $20 bill I could have sworn I placed in the drawer by the phone. Gone. Then $40 missing from the envelope I kept for emergencies. I remember counting it twice the week before. I've always been careful with money. George taught me that. If you don't respect your money, he'd say it won't respect you. So I counted and recounted. And still, it didn't add up. The first time I mentioned it to Daniel, he laughed. Not unkindly, just dismissively. "Mom, you probably just forgot where you put it," he said, leaning back in his chair like the idea was harmless. "It happens." I smiled, even though something inside me tightened. "I don't usually forget things like that," I said gently. He reached over and squeezed my hand. I know. But hey, we're all getting older, right? We're all getting older." The way he said it made it sound like a shared condition, but it wasn't. Not really. A week later, a pair of earrings went missing. They weren't expensive. Just a small gold set George gave me on our 20th anniversary. I kept them in a velvet box in my bedroom drawer. I remembered taking them out, holding them for a moment, thinking about him, then putting them back. And then they were gone. This time when I mentioned it, Lindsay was there. "Oh, Avery," she said softly, tilting her head with concern. "Are you sure you didn't misplace them?" "I always put them in the same place," I replied. Daniel and Lindsay exchanged a quick glance. It lasted less than a second. But I saw it. That look, it wasn't confusion. It was confirmation. Daniel stood up and walked over to me, resting his hands lightly on my shoulders. "Mom, listen," he said carefully, his voice lowering like he was trying not to alarm me. "It's nothing to be embarrassed about. These things happen. Maybe it's time we start keeping a closer eye on things, just to help you out. Help me out." The words settled in the room like dust. I nodded slowly because I didn't know what else to do. But that night, lying in my bed, staring at the ceiling where George once insisted on installing a ceiling fan himself crooked slightly off-center, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel since he died. Doubt. Not in my memory. In them. Still, I told myself I was overthinking, that grief can make the mind wander, that loneliness can twist perception. I didn't want to become the kind of person who saw betrayal where there was none, so I let it go, or at least I pretended to. Over the next few weeks, Daniel's visits became more purposeful. He started asking questions. At first they were harmless. "Do you still have that savings account Dad set up? Where do you keep your important documents? Have you thought about simplifying things? Fewer bills, less stress." I answered carefully, vaguely. I didn't lie, but I didn't offer more than necessary. Lindsay, on the other hand, became more involved in subtle ways. One afternoon, while I was in the kitchen making tea, I came back to find her standing near my desk. "Oh," she said, quickly smiling. "I was just looking for a pen." There were 3 pens in a holder right in front of her. She wasn't holding any of them. Another time, she asked if she could help organize my paperwork. "I just hate seeing you deal with all this alone," she said, already pulling open drawers before I answered. I watched her hands move quick, efficient, too familiar with things that were not hers. That same night, I found a folder slightly out of place. It was small, so small most people wouldn't notice, but I did. And that was when the doubt stopped being quiet. It didn't scream, it didn't accuse, it just sat there, heavy and undeniable. Something wasn't right. The missing money, the missing jewelry, the questions, the glances. The way Daniel said managing. The way Lindsay smiled just a little too much when I hesitated. It all began to form a shape in my mind, something I didn't want to name, because naming it would make it real. And if it was real, then the son I raised, the boy I once held through fevers and nightmares, the man I trusted to carry forward everything George and I built, was not who I thought he was. I wish I could tell you I confronted them right then. I wish I could say I demanded answers, that I stood tall and refused to be made small in my own home. But I didn't. Because love doesn't disappear just because trust begins to crack. It lingers, it argues, it begs you to believe there's another explanation. So I stayed quiet. I watched, and I waited. Not knowing that what I would eventually discover would be far worse than anything I had allowed myself to imagine. The camera was never meant for my son. That's the truth I keep coming back to, even now. It was installed because of fear, but not the kind that comes from family. Not at first. About 6 months before everything unraveled, I woke up one night to a sound I couldn't place. It was faint, like something brushing against wood. I remember sitting up in bed, my heart pounding, listening so hard that the silence itself started to feel loud. I told myself it was nothing. An old house makes noises, pipes shift, floors creak, wind finds its way into places it shouldn't. But then I heard it again. A soft click, coming from somewhere down the hall. I didn't get out of bed. I stayed there gripping the edge of the blanket, my mind racing through every possibility except the one I didn't want to face, that someone might be inside my home. The next morning, I checked every door and window, all locked. Nothing missing, no signs of forced entry. I almost convinced myself I imagined it, until I mentioned it to Frank Collins. Frank has lived next door for nearly 20 years. He's the kind of neighbor George trusted without question, the kind who shows up with a ladder before you even ask, who keeps an eye on your house when you're away, who remembers to check in without making it feel like pity. He's also a retired police sergeant. When I told him what happened, he didn't brush it off. He didn't smile and say, "You probably just heard the house settling." Instead, he listened, really listened, and then he said something that stayed with me. "Avery, you don't need to prove something happened to protect yourself. Feeling unsafe is reason enough." I remember hesitating. "I don't want to turn my home into a place I have to watch," I told him. "George and we never lived like that." Frank nodded slowly. "I understand," he said. But a camera doesn't change your home. It just gives you a way to see what's already happening. That was the part that unsettled me. What's already happening? A few days later, I agreed. Not to a full security system, not alarms or blinking lights or anything that would make the house feel unfamiliar. Just one small camera, discreet, hidden. Frank recommended a young technician named Caleb who handled installations for people in the neighborhood. He came by that Friday afternoon, polite, respectful, careful not to make me feel foolish for being cautious. We walked through the house together. "Where do you spend most of your time?" he asked. "The living room," I said, "and the desk area by the window." He nodded, looking around thoughtfully. "That's where I'd suggest placing it," he said. "We can position it so it captures the main space without being obvious." I hesitated again. "Will it be noticeable?" I asked. He smiled gently. "Only if you know exactly where to look." That was how the camera ended up inside the antique cabinet George bought at an estate sale years ago. It was a beautiful piece. Dark wood, hand-carved edges, a small glass panel that had a slight distortion to it if you looked closely enough. Caleb positioned the camera behind that glass, angled just right to capture the living room and, more importantly, the small desk against the wall. The desk where I kept my drawer, the drawer where I kept emergency cash, and documents, things I didn't want to put in the bank, things George had always said were better kept close. Caleb showed me how to access the footage from my phone. "It records when it detects motion," he explained, "and you'll get a notification if you want. Or you can just check it manually." I chose not to turn on notifications. At the time, I told myself it was because I didn't want to feel watched in my own home. Now I think it was because some part of me didn't want to know. For weeks, the camera captured nothing unusual. Just me moving through my days, making coffee in the morning, folding laundry in the afternoon, sitting in George's chair in the evening sometimes, with a book, sometimes just staring out the window as the light changed. Ordinary moments, quiet ones, safe ones. And then slowly, something else began to change. Daniel's visits became more frequent, not just once or twice a week, but sometimes 3-4 times, always with a reason. "I was in the area. I thought you might need groceries. I wanted to check on you." At first it felt like care, but then I noticed something. He wasn't just visiting, he was observing. His eyes would linger on things, the desk, the drawers, the small habits I didn't even realize I had, where I placed my keys, how I sorted my mail when I stepped out to water the plants in the backyard. Lindsay started coming with him more often too. She was always warm, always smiling, but her warmth had edges. One afternoon, she stood in the living room looking around like she was measuring something invisible. "You know," she said casually, "this house is probably worth a lot now." I gave a small shrug. "It's just a house," I said. She laughed lightly. "Maybe to you," she replied, "but to the market, it's an asset. An asset. Not a home, not the place where her husband grew up, not the place where George and I built a life. An asset." I didn't respond, but I remembered. That same week, Daniel brought up my finances again. "Mom, have you thought about consolidating things?" he asked, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. "It'd be easier if everything was in one place. Less confusion." "I'm not confused," I said quietly. I know, he replied quickly. "I just mean, down the line, it's better to plan ahead. Plan ahead." For what? For when I couldn't manage, for when I needed help, or for when they decided I did. A few days later, Lindsay asked if she could take pictures of some of my documents, just to help organize things digitally, she said. "It's safer that way." I hesitated, only for a second, but she noticed. "It's just in case something happens," she added quickly. "We want to be able to step in and help immediately." Step in, help. The words sounded right, but they felt wrong. Still, I let her. I stood there and watched as she carefully laid out papers on the table. My insurance information, a copy of the deed, old account summaries. Her phone moved quickly, snapping photo after photo. At one point, she adjusted the angle, making sure everything was clear, too deliberate. That night after they left, I went into the living room and sat down. The house felt different, not unsafe, not yet, but observed. Like something had shifted in a way I couldn't quite explain. That was the first time I opened the camera app without any specific reason. Just curiosity, just a feeling. I scrolled back through the recordings. Day after day of nothing until I reached one from earlier that afternoon. Daniel and Lindsay. Alone in my living room. They thought I was in the kitchen. Their voices were low, but the audio was clear enough. "She's keeping more cash than I thought," Lindsay said. Daniel let out a quiet breath. "Yeah," he replied. "We just need to move carefully. Move carefully." I felt my chest tighten. "Do you think she suspects anything?" Lindsay asked. There was a pause. Then Daniel laughed. Soft, dismissive. "No," he said. "She's fine. She's just getting older." Getting older. I sat there in the dim light, the phone trembling slightly in my hand. That was the moment something inside me changed. Not completely, not yet, but enough. Enough to know that whatever I was afraid of was no longer outside my home. It was already inside, and I had just started to see it clearly. The Sunday everything changed began like every other. I woke before sunrise, as I usually do, and sat at the edge of my bed for a moment, letting the quiet settle around me. There was something comforting about those early hours before the world woke up, before expectations and conversations and small performances of normalcy began. I made my coffee the way George liked it, even though he wasn't there to drink it anymore. 2 spoons of sugar, a splash of cream. Habit, I suppose, or maybe memory. Church started at 9. I dressed slowly, choosing a soft blue blouse I hadn't worn in a while. Something about it made me feel steady, grounded, like I still had some control over the shape of my day. The service was familiar, predictable. Pastor Elijah spoke about forgiveness, about how it isn't always about the other person, but about freeing yourself from the weight of what's been done. I remember thinking that sounds easier than it is. Afterward, I lingered longer than usual. I spoke with a few women I've known for years. We talked about nothing important recipes, grandchildren, the weather turning warmer, but even in those small conversations, I felt slightly removed, like I was watching myself from a distance. Something inside me had already begun to pull away. By the time I left, it was just after 11. Normally, I would have stayed for coffee in the fellowship hall, but that day, I felt a strange urgency to go home. I couldn't explain it. There was no reason, no clear thought guiding me, just a feeling. The drive back was quiet. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Daniel's car. My stomach dropped. He hadn't mentioned coming by. For a brief moment, I considered staying in the car, just sitting there waiting, giving myself time to think. But that same instinct that brought me home early pushed me forward. I stepped out. The front door was unlocked. That alone wasn't unusual. Daniel had a spare key. He'd used it many times before, but something about it felt different. I opened the door slowly, careful not to let it creak. The house was quiet at first. Then I heard voices from the living room, Daniel and Lindsay. I froze in the hallway. Something in their tone stopped me from calling out. They didn't sound like guests. They sounded comfortable, private. I took a step closer, my hand brushing lightly against the wall for balance. The door to the living room was slightly open. Just enough. "We can't keep doing this halfway," Lindsay was saying, her voice low but sharp. "If we're going to fix this, we need more than a few hundred at a time." My heart began to pound. Daniel sighed. "I know," he said. "I just don't want to push too fast. If she notices, she won't." Lindsay cut in quickly. "She barely keeps track of anything as it is." There was a pause. Then I heard it. A drawer sliding open. My drawer. I couldn't breathe. I leaned slightly toward the gap in the door, just enough to see. Daniel stood by the desk, his hand inside the drawer. Lindsay behind him, arms crossed, watching. He pulled out the envelope, the one I kept for emergencies, the one George always insisted we never touch unless absolutely necessary. Daniel flipped it open casually, like it meant nothing, like it had always been his. He began counting the money. The soft flick of bills against each other filled the room. "That's what, maybe 600, Lindsay said. "Something like that," Daniel replied. And then he laughed, a quiet, careless laugh I had never heard from him before. "The old bat won't notice," he said. The words hit me like something physical, heavy, cold, final. For a moment I thought I might collapse right there in the hallway, not because of the money, but because of the way he said it. So easily, so comfortably, as if I had already been reduced to something less than human in his mind. Lindsay didn't laugh. She was already thinking ahead. We still need more, she said. The bank's going to start asking questions if we don't cover that payment. Bank. Questions. My thoughts struggled to catch up. What are you talking about? Daniel asked, a hint of tension in his voice. You know exactly what I'm talking about, Lindsay replied. You said you had it handled. I do, he said quickly. I just need a little more time. You don't have time, she snapped. We're already behind. Silence fell between them, heavy, uncomfortable. Daniel exhaled slowly. I'll figure it out, he said. I always do. I stepped back, carefully, quietly, my entire body trembling. Every instinct in me screamed to walk in there, to demand an explanation, to look my son in the eyes and ask him how he could stand in my home, and speak about me like that. But something else held me back, something colder, clearer. If I walked in now, they would lie. They would twist it. They would turn it into confusion, into misunderstanding, into concern for my memory. And I would have nothing. No proof, no control. So instead, I did the one thing I never imagined I would do in my own house. I turned around, walked back out the front door, closed it quietly behind me, and went back to my car. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my hands began to ache. Then I reached for my phone. My fingers hesitated for only a second before dialing. Frank answered on the second ring. Avery, I need you, I said. My voice sounded strange, flat, distant. What's wrong? He asked immediately. They're in my house, I said. Who, Daniel and Lindsay? There was a pause, and I swallowed. They're taking money, I said, and I heard him. Frank, I heard what he said about me. His voice changed, sharpened. Are you safe? I'm outside, I replied. In the car. Stay there, he said firmly. I'm coming over. I ended the call and leaned back in the seat. The world felt tilted, like everything I thought I understood had shifted just slightly out of place. 15 minutes later, Daniel and Lindsay walked out of the house. They looked normal, calm, unbothered. Daniel locked the door behind them, like nothing had happened, like they hadn't just crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. They got into their car and drove away. I waited. 5 minutes, 10. Then Frank pulled into the driveway. He got out quickly, his expression serious. You ready? He asked. I nodded. We walked inside together. The house felt the same, and not the same at all. I went straight to the desk, opened the drawer. The envelope was still there, but lighter. I didn't count it. I didn't need to. Instead, I turned to Frank. I have a camera, I said. He raised an eyebrow. Since when? Since that night I thought someone broke in, I replied. Does it? Yes, I said before he could finish. It covers this room. I reached for my phone, opened the app. My hands shook as I scrolled to the most recent recording. There it was, time-stamped, clear. I pressed play. We watched in silence, Daniel opening the drawer, counting the money, Lindsay speaking, and then his voice. Again. The old bat won't notice. This time it echoed, not just in the room, but in something deeper, something final. When the video ended, I lowered the phone slowly. Frank didn't speak right away. He didn't need to, because in that moment there was no more doubt, no more confusion, no more room for explanations. Only truth, and the truth was far worse than anything I had feared. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I couldn't, but because I was afraid of what my mind might do if I closed my eyes. Some part of me still wanted to wake up and believe I had misunderstood, that there was context, missing some explanation that would make everything smaller, less cruel, less final. But the truth doesn't soften just because we wish it would. It sits there, solid, unmoving. I stayed in the living room long after Frank left the phone resting in my hand like it weighed more than it should. I must have watched that recording a dozen times each time, hoping something would change his tone, his words, the look on his face. Nothing did. Daniel wasn't confused. He wasn't hesitant. He was comfortable. That was the part I couldn't escape. Sometime around 3 a.m, I stood up and walked to the desk. I opened the drawer again. The envelope lay exactly where he had left it, neatly tucked in, as if respect could be restored by careful placement. I pulled it out and counted. $340. There should have been at least $600. I didn't cry. I thought I would. I expected some wave of grief to crash over me, something loud and overwhelming, but instead what I felt was quiet. a kind of stillness that settles in when something inside you has already broken and decided not to make a sound about it. I placed the money back in the envelope, closed the drawer, and then I did something George used to do whenever something didn't feel right. I went looking for patterns. By morning, I had gathered every bank statement, every receipt, every piece of paperwork I could find. I spread them across the dining table, the same table where we used to sit for Sunday dinners, where Daniel once spilled juice and cried like the world had ended. Now it held something else entirely, evidence. At first it was overwhelming, numbers, dates, transactions that meant nothing on their own. But I forced myself to slow down, to look carefully, to think. George always said details tell the truth. You just have to listen long enough. So I listened. And slowly, something began to take shape. Withdrawals I didn't remember making. Small at first, then larger. Checks I had signed, but not quite like I usually sign them. My signature, but rushed. Pressured. I remember Daniel sitting beside me a few months ago, sliding papers across the table. Just routine stuff Mommy had said. Insurance updates, nothing major. I hadn't read everything. I trusted him. Now looking at those documents again, I felt a cold realization settle into place. He hadn't forced me. He hadn't needed to. He had guided me, carefully, patiently, like someone leading a person through a maze they didn't realize they were in. By late morning, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't new. It had been happening for months, maybe longer. And the money he took yesterday, that was just the part I finally saw. I didn't call Daniel. I didn't text him. Instead, I picked up the phone and called Rachel Monroe. She answered on the third ring. "Avery," she said warmly. "It's been a while." Rachel handled George's estate after he passed. She was thorough, calm, the kind of person who made complicated things feel manageable. "I need to see you," I said. Something in my voice must have told her this wasn't casual. "Come in this afternoon," she replied. "I'll clear my schedule." Her office sat in a quiet part of town, tucked between a small bookstore and a cafe that always smelled like fresh bread. I arrived early, sat in my car for a few minutes, then walked in. Rachel greeted me with a gentle smile, but her eyes were already searching my face. "What's going on?" she asked once we were seated. I didn't ease into it. I couldn't. I handed her my phone. "Watch this," I said. She did, all the way through. Her expression didn't change much while she watched, but when it ended, she set the phone down slowly. "Okay," she said. "Tell me everything." So I did. The missing money, the missing jewelry, the conversations, the paperwork, the pressure. Everything. Rachel listened without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back slightly, her hands folded together. "This is serious, Avery," she said. I nodded. "I know." She picked up one of the documents I had brought with me. "Did you sign this?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Daniel said it was for insurance." She studied it carefully. "This isn't insurance," she said. "This is a limited financial authorization form." My stomach tightened. "What does that mean?" "It means," she explained, "that if completed fully, it could have given Daniel access to manage certain financial activities on your behalf. Could have I asked?" She flipped to the last page. "Fortunately, it's incomplete," she said. "You didn't sign the final section. Without that, it's not valid." Relief washed over me, sharp, brief, then disappeared just as quickly. "They were trying to get me to," I said. Rachel met my eyes. "Yes," she said. "It looks that way." Silence settled between us, heavy, real. "What do I do?" I asked. It was the first time I'd asked that question out loud. Rachel didn't answer immediately. She stood up, walked to the window, then turned back. First she said, "You do not confront them." The words felt counterintuitive. "Why not?" I asked. "Because the moment you do," she said, "they will adjust. They'll deny, minimize, or worse, accelerate whatever plan they have." I thought about that, about the way Daniel had spoken, about how easily he dismissed me. She was right. "They don't know what you know," Rachel continued. "That's your advantage." Advantage. I hadn't thought of it that way. "But we need to move carefully," she added. "We need documentation. A pattern. Not just one incident. I have the video," I said. "Yes," she nodded. "And that's powerful. But if this escalates, and we want more than one moment. We want a clear, undeniable story." I swallowed. "You think it's going to get worse?" Rachel held my gaze. I think she said slowly that people who are willing to cross this line rarely stop on their own. That settled something inside me. Not fear. Not exactly. Something firmer, colder. What should I do? I asked again. This time Rachel answered without hesitation. You watch, she said. You document. And you let them believe exactly what they already believe. What's that? She paused. That you don't see what they're doing. I let that sink in. The idea felt unnatural. To sit across from my own son, to look him in the eyes and pretend I didn't know. But then I remembered his voice, the way he laughed. The old bat won't notice. I took a slow breath. Okay, I said. Rachel nodded. I'll start securing your accounts, she added, quietly. No sudden changes, and I want you to keep everything, every interaction, every missing dollar, every conversation you can remember. I stood up to leave, but paused at the door. Rachel, I said. She looked up. Do you think he knows what he's doing? I asked. The question hung in the air between us. She didn't answer immediately. Then gently. Yes, she said. I nodded, because deep down I already knew that, and somehow that hurt more than anything else. The hardest part wasn't pretending. It was remembering who I was pretending for. I had spent most of my life being honest sometimes to a fault. George used to tease me about it, say I had a face that couldn't hide anything. You were never meant to play games, Avery. He'd laugh. You're too transparent. Maybe he was right. Because now every time Daniel looked at me, every time Lindsay smiled that careful smile, I had to hold something inside that felt too big to contain. The truth. And I had to act like it didn't exist. It started small. The next time Daniel came over, I greeted him the same way I always had, with a warm smile, a light hug, a question about his day. He watched me closely, too closely, as if he was searching for something, a crack, a sign, anything that might suggest I knew. I gave him nothing. Well, look at you, he said, glancing around the living room. Everything looks nice. I haven't changed much, I replied lightly. He nodded, but his eyes drifted briefly, almost unconsciously, toward the desk, the drawer. I followed his gaze for just a second before looking away, pretending not to notice. You still keeping cash around? He asked casually, walking toward it. There it was, not even subtle. Oh, just a little, I said, with a soft shrug. Old habits. He chuckled. Yeah, Dad used to say that too, used to, as if those habits had an expiration date, as if they were waiting to be replaced. I turned toward the kitchen. Do you want some coffee? I asked. Sure, he said. As I walked away, I could feel his presence behind me, not following, but lingering, listening, measuring. I moved slowly, deliberately giving him time. Time to do what he thought I wouldn't notice. When I came back, he was sitting on the couch, hands empty, expression relaxed, too relaxed. We talked for a while about nothing important, the weather, a neighbor who had repainted their house, a story he had already told me twice before. And then just as I expected, he shifted the conversation. Mom, he said, leaning forward slightly, have you thought any more about what we talked about, making things easier? I tilted my head as if trying to remember. What do you mean? I asked. His eyes softened, not with kindness, but with something closer to calculation. Just organizing things, he said. Your accounts, your paperwork, making sure everything's in order. I let a small pause linger. Oh, I said slowly. Yes, that. He waited. So many papers, I added, with a faint, almost embarrassed smile. I can barely keep track of them all these days. There it was. The moment. The line I crossed. Not because it was true, but because it was useful. Daniel's shoulders relaxed almost instantly. See, he said gently, that's exactly what I mean. You shouldn't have to deal with all that alone. Alone. As if independence was a problem to be solved. As if needing no one was a flaw. I nodded. You're probably right, I said. The words tasted bitter, but I swallowed them. From that point on, things began to change. Not dramatically, not in a way anyone outside would notice, but in small, subtle shifts. Daniel became more confident, more direct. He asked more questions, visited more frequently. Lindsay followed his lead. She stopped pretending to ask permission before touching things. One afternoon, I walked into the living room to find her opening my desk drawer. Oh, she said, startled, then quickly smiled. I was just looking for that notepad you mentioned. "It's in the kitchen," I said calmly. Her hand paused for a fraction of a second before she closed the drawer. "Of course," she said, laughing lightly. "I always forget. Always forget." The irony didn't escape me. That same evening, I sat down with a small notebook I had started keeping hidden in the back of my closet. I wrote everything down. Dates, times, conversations, missing amounts, even the smallest details, the way Daniel's tone shifted when he thought I wasn't paying attention, the way Lindsay's eyes scanned a room before she spoke. It felt strange at first, like I was documenting my own life from the outside. But over time, it became something else. Control. Rachel had been right. Patterns matter. And I was beginning to see them clearly. A few days later, she called me. "I've made some adjustments," she said. "Your accounts are secure. Any unusual activity will trigger alerts, but quietly." "Will they know?" I asked. "No," she replied. "Not unless they try something significant." I exhaled slowly. "Good." "There's one more thing," she added. "Be careful how quickly you change your behavior. If they sense a shift, they might pull back." "I understand," I said. And I did. That was the delicate part. Not pushing too hard, not revealing too much, just enough to keep them moving forward, to let them believe they were in control. Meanwhile, Frank came by that weekend. We sat in the living room, the same room where everything had begun to unravel. "I adjusted the camera angle slightly," he said. "It'll give you a wider view now." "Will they notice?" I asked. He shook his head. "Not unless they're looking for it," he said. "And people rarely look for what they don't expect." I nodded. That seemed to be the theme of everything lately. Expectation, assumption. Daniel assumed I was weak. Lindsay assumed I was unaware. And because of that, they were becoming careless. That night, I checked the footage again. There they were, standing in my living room, talking. Lindsay pacing slightly. Daniel leaning against the desk. "We need to move faster," she said. "This isn't enough." "I told you we have to be careful," Daniel replied. "Careful doesn't pay the bills," she snapped. There was a pause. Then something shifted in his voice. Frustration. Sharp. "You think I don't know that," he said. "I'm doing what I can." "What you can isn't working," she shot back. "If we don't fix this soon—" She stopped, but she didn't need to finish. The silence said enough. "What do you want me to do?" Daniel asked. And that question, that simple, quiet question, carried something I hadn't heard before. Not hesitation, not doubt, willingness. Lindsay turned toward him slowly. Her voice dropped, lower, more controlled. "We need something bigger," she said, "something permanent." I leaned closer to the screen, my heart pounding. "What do you mean?" Daniel asked. Another pause, longer this time. "Then if she can't manage things anymore," Lindsay said carefully, "we won't have to keep doing this piece by piece." The room seemed to go still. Even through the screen, I felt it. Daniel didn't respond right away. Not because he disagreed, but because he was thinking, calculating. How would we even prove that, he asked finally. Lindsay's lips curved slightly. "We don't have to prove it completely," she said. "We just have to raise enough concern." Concern. Such a soft word for something so dangerous. I sat back slowly, my hands cold, my thoughts sharp, because in that moment I understood. This was never just about money. This was about control, about taking everything not by force, but by making it look like it was necessary, like it was for my own good. I stared at the screen long after the recording ended. The room around me felt different, smaller, colder, but inside me, something had changed. The confusion was gone. The doubt was gone. All that remained was clarity, and with it, a decision. I wasn't just going to watch anymore. I was going to make sure. They never got the chance to finish what they started. The word that stayed with me wasn't money. It wasn't theft. It wasn't even betrayal. It was willingness. The quiet, steady willingness in Daniel's voice when Lindsay suggested something bigger, something permanent. He didn't say no. He didn't recoil. He asked how. That was the moment I stopped searching for excuses, because whatever pieces of the boy I raised still lived inside him. They were no longer in control. The next few days I moved carefully, not slower, not faster, just deliberately. Rachel's words echoed in my mind. Let them believe what they already believe. So I did. I forgot small things, on purpose. I asked Daniel to remind me of a date I already knew. I misplaced a set of keys temporarily, only to find them later in a place I claimed I didn't remember putting them. Each time I watched his reaction, at first concern, then something else. Relief, validation, as if every small slip confirmed a story he had already decided was true. Lindsay, on the other hand, didn't bother hiding her satisfaction as much. One afternoon, she stood in the kitchen watching me struggle intentionally with a stack of mail. "Oh, Avery," she said softly, stepping closer, "you don't have to deal with all this." "I've always handled my own things," I replied, letting just a hint of uncertainty slip into my voice. "I know," she said quickly, "but things change, and that's okay. Things change. Yes, they do, but not always in the way people expect." That evening, after they left, I sat down and reviewed the camera footage again. Patterns. That's what I was looking for. And now they were clearer than ever. Daniel didn't just take money randomly. He chose moments. Times when I was distracted, times when I was out, times when Lindsay was with him, always together, always coordinated. And then there were the conversations. Short, fragmented, but enough to paint a picture. Debt, pressure. Something about a missed payment, a reference to a deadline that was getting closer, and always urgency. I wrote everything down. Every word I could make out, every shift in tone, every glance between them that spoke louder than anything they said out loud. 2 days later, the camera captured something new, something louder, something harder to ignore. They were arguing, not quietly this time, not carefully. Lindsay stood near the window, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "This isn't working," she said sharply. "We're barely making a dent." Daniel ran a hand through his hair, pacing slightly. "I told you we can't just take everything at once," he said. "That's how people get caught. People get caught because they're stupid," Lindsay shot back. "We're being too cautious." He stopped, turned toward her. "And what exactly are you suggesting?" he asked. Her expression didn't change. Not anger, not frustration, something colder. Exactly what I said before she replied. "We need something bigger." My chest tightened. I leaned closer to the screen. Daniel shook his head slightly. "That's not simple," he said. "It's not like we can just—" "We don't need simple," she interrupted. "We need effective." There was a pause. Long, heavy, and then. "She's already forgetting things," Lindsay continued, her voice dropping. "You've seen it." I felt something twist inside me. Daniel hesitated. Not because it wasn't true, but because he was deciding how to use it. "It's not that bad," he said finally. "Not yet," Lindsay replied, "but it doesn't have to be." Silence. "Then if we get ahead of it," she went on, "we can frame it as concern, as care. No one questions that. Frame it." The word echoed, carefully chosen, carefully delivered. Daniel exhaled slowly. "You're talking about—" he began, then stopped. "About making sure we're protected," Lindsay finished. Protected. From what? From their own decisions, from the consequences they had already set in motion. "She trusts you," Lindsay added quietly. "That's the advantage." The advantage. I sat back, my hands cold, because now it was clear, completely. They weren't reacting to a problem. They were building a plan, one that didn't just involve taking money, but taking control, piece by piece, until there was nothing left for me to hold on to. Later that night, I called Rachel. "They're planning something bigger," I said. Her voice remained calm. "Tell me exactly what you heard." I did, every word, every pause, every implication. When I finished, there was a brief silence. "Then okay," she said. "We're ahead of them." The words surprised me. "Are we?" I asked. "Yes," she replied, "because we know what direction they're moving in." I closed my eyes for a moment. "And what do we do?" "Two things," she said. "First, we strengthen your position." "How I want you to schedule a cognitive evaluation," she said. I blinked. "A what, a formal assessment?" she explained. "Memory, reasoning, decision-making? Documented, on record." I understood immediately. "They're going to try to say I can't manage things," I said. "Yes," she replied. "And when they do, we'll already have proof that you can." A small, steady sense of control settled in my chest. "And the second thing?" I asked. Rachel's tone shifted slightly. "Keep watching," she said, "but be ready." "Ready for what?" "For them to move faster," she replied. That night, I didn't watch the footage again. I didn't need to. I had seen enough. Instead, I sat in the living room, the same room where Daniel had stood just days before laughing as he took something that wasn't his. I looked around. At the walls George had painted, at the chair he used to sit in, at the small details that made this house more than just a structure. It wasn't an asset. It wasn't a resource. It was my life, and they were trying to take it from me, not with force, but with something far more dangerous, justification. I thought about Daniel as a child, the way he used to run into this room full of energy, full of trust, the way he used to look at me like I was the safest place in the world. And I wondered, at what point did that change? When did I stop being his mother and start being something he could use? The question didn't have an answer, or maybe it did, and I just didn't want to accept it. But one thing was certain, whatever came next, I wouldn't be unprepared, because for the first time since this all began, I wasn't reacting. I was ready. And if they thought I was slipping, if they believed I was fading, then they were about to learn something they never expected. I wasn't losing control. I was letting them believe I had, and that belief would be their biggest mistake. The morning of my evaluation, I woke before the alarm, not because I was anxious, but because I was clear. There's a difference. Anxiety feels scattered, like your thoughts are trying to outrun each other. Clarity, on the other hand, is quiet, focused. It doesn't rush. It doesn't panic. It simply knows. And for the first time in weeks, I knew exactly what I was doing. I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual, studying my own reflection. 68 years old, lines where laughter used to live, eyes that had seen enough to recognize when something wasn't right, even if it took time to admit it. "You're not confused," I said softly to myself. "You're not slipping." The words weren't for reassurance. They were a reminder. I dressed carefully. Nothing too formal, nothing too casual, just enough to look like myself, like the woman I had always been, not the version Daniel and Lindsay were trying to create. The clinic was about 20 minutes away. I drove there alone, and that mattered more than I expected, because independence, I realized, isn't just about what you can do. It's about what you refuse to give up. The waiting room was quiet. A few other people sat scattered in chairs, flipping through magazines or staring at nothing in particular. I wondered briefly what brought them there: fear, concern, pressure from family, or something else entirely. When my name was called, I stood up without hesitation. The doctor, Dr. Harris, greeted me with a calm, professional warmth. "Mrs. Bennett," he said, shaking my hand. "Come on in." His office was simple, clean, neutral, a place designed not to influence, only to observe. We started with conversation. Basic questions. How have you been feeling lately? Any concerns about your memory? Do you manage your own finances? I answered honestly, clearly, without rushing. Then came the assessments. Short-term recall, problem solving, word associations, patterns. Tasks that on the surface felt simple but carried weight. I didn't rush those either. I took my time. Because this wasn't about proving I was fast, it was about proving I was present. When we finished, Dr. Harris leaned back slightly, reviewing his notes. Well, he said after a moment, everything looks very solid. I felt something in my chest loosen. "Solid?" I asked. He smiled. Sharp, aware, fully capable, he clarified. "There's no indication of cognitive decline that would interfere with your independence." There it was, not just reassurance. Documentation, proof. "Thank you," I said quietly. As I left the clinic, I didn't feel victorious. I felt grounded, like a piece of the ground beneath me had been reinforced, made stronger, harder to shift. Rachel was waiting for my call. "Well," she asked the moment I spoke. "He said I'm fully capable," I replied. "I didn't expect anything less," she said. "We'll get that report on file immediately." There was a brief pause. Then I also found something she added. My grip tightened slightly on the phone. "What kind of something Daniel has been making inquiries," she said. "Quiet ones, about legal guardianship options." The word landed heavily. Guardianship. "I thought so," I said. "He hasn't filed anything," Rachel continued, "but he's asking questions, testing the process." I closed my eyes for a moment. "He's preparing," I said. "Yes," she replied, "but now so are we. That was the difference. For the first time, we weren't behind. We were ahead." Later that afternoon, something unexpected happened. My phone buzzed with a message. Mia, Daniel's daughter. We hadn't spoken much lately, not because we didn't care about each other, but because life had a way of creating distance where it shouldn't. "Are you home?" she wrote. I hesitated for a moment before replying. "Yes." "Everything okay?" There was a pause. "Then can I come by?" Something in those words felt different, not casual, not routine. Of course, I typed back. "Anytime." She arrived about 30 minutes later. No announcement, no small talk, just a quiet knock on the door. When I opened it, I saw it immediately. The tension in her posture, the way her eyes scanned my face like she was looking for something. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey, sweetheart," I replied, stepping aside to let her in. She walked into the living room slowly like she wasn't sure what to say or where to begin. "Do you want something to drink?" I asked. She shook her head. "No, I'm okay." We sat down, across from each other. Silence stretched between us for a moment. "Then are you okay?" she asked. The question caught me off guard. "I'm fine," I said gently. "Why do you ask?" She hesitated, looked down at her hands, then back at me. "Because things at home are weird," she said. My chest tightened slightly. "What do you mean?" I asked. She exhaled slowly. "Mom and Dad have been fighting a lot," she said, "about money, about stuff I don't really understand." I nodded, letting her continue. "And they talk about you," she added quietly. There it was, the part she had been building toward. "What do they say?" I asked, carefully. Mia shifted in her seat. "Just things," she said, "like how you don't need all that space, how it'd be easier if you moved, how you don't really keep track of things anymore." Each word landed exactly where I expected, but hearing it from her, that was different. "Do you believe them?" I asked. She looked at me immediately. "No," she said, not hesitant, not unsure. Just no. Something inside me softened. "Why not?" I asked. She shrugged slightly. "Because you're not like that," she said. "And because they don't talk about it like they're worried." I tilted my head. "What do you mean?" She frowned slightly, searching for the right words. "They don't sound concerned," she said. "They sound like they're planning something." "Planning," the word echoed. "How long have you noticed this?" I asked. "A while," she admitted. "But it's getting worse." I nodded slowly. Then she reached into her bag. "There's something else," she said. My heart skipped. She pulled out her phone, opened a photo, and turned it toward me. It was Lindsay. Sitting at their kitchen table, a folder open in front of her, a folder I recognized immediately. "My folder, how did you get this?" I asked quietly. "I took it," Mia said, "a couple weeks ago." Why she hesitated. "Because it felt wrong," she said. I stared at the image, at the papers spread out in front of Lindsay, at the way she leaned over them, focused, deliberate, not helping, not organizing, studying, planning. I looked back at Mia. "You shouldn't have to deal with this," I said softly. She shrugged again. "I just didn't know who to tell," she said. "You told the right person," I replied, and I meant it, because in that moment I realized something important. Mia wasn't just a witness, she was a mirror. Reflecting back the truth, Daniel and Lindsay thought they were hiding, and that truth was no longer contained, not in whispers, not in hidden conversations, not in assumptions. It was out, seen, shared, and that made it stronger. I reached over and took her hand. "You're not alone in this," I said. She nodded, and for the first time since she walked in, she smiled, just a little, but enough. Enough to remind me that not everything in this family was broken, not yet, and not beyond repair. But as I sat there holding her hand, one thought settled firmly into place. Whatever Daniel and Lindsay were planning, they were running out of time, because now I wasn't the only one watching. Mia didn't stay long that afternoon, not because she didn't want to, but because she was careful. Careful in a way that no 16-year-old should have to be. "I told them I was going to a friend's house," she said as she stood near the door, her fingers tightening slightly around the strap of her bag. "If I'm gone too long, they'll start asking questions." I nodded. "You did the right thing coming here," I told her. She hesitated, then looked at me with something deeper than worry, something closer to responsibility. "I just didn't want you to be the only one who didn't know," she said. The words stayed with me long after she left, because the truth was, I hadn't been the only one who didn't know. I had been the only one who didn't want to know. There's a difference. And once that line is crossed, once the truth is no longer something you can pretend isn't there, everything changes. That evening, I sat at the dining table again, the same one now covered in documents notes and carefully written observations. But this time, something was different. Before I had been trying to understand, now I was confirming. Mia's photo sat in front of me. I studied it closely. The angle, The lighting, the details. Lindsay hadn't just glanced at those papers. She had spread them out, organized them, positioned them for clarity. That wasn't curiosity. That was intention. I reached for my notebook and wrote it down. Evidence unauthorized access to personal documents. Witness Mia Bennett. Photo timestamped. The words felt formal, deliberate, necessary. For the first time, I wasn't just recording what I saw. I was building something. A case. Not just emotionally, but factually, objectively. Something that couldn't be dismissed as confusion or exaggeration. Later that night, I called Rachel. "I have more," I said. She listened as I explained everything Mia had told me. The conversations, the tension at home, the photo. When I finished, there was a pause. "Then that's significant," Rachel said. "I thought so," I replied. "It shows a pattern," she continued. "Not just opportunistic behavior, but ongoing deliberate access to your information." I exhaled slowly. "So what does that mean?" "It means," she said carefully, "if this escalates, and it likely will we have corroboration, not just from you, but from another source." "Mia," I said. "Yes," Rachel confirmed. "Though we'll need to be careful involving her directly. She's still a minor. I don't want to drag her into anything," I said quickly. "And we won't," Rachel assured me. But her observations help establish context. Context. Another piece of the puzzle, another layer of truth. Keep everything, she added. Every detail matters now. "I will," I said. After the call, I sat back in my chair, staring at the table in front of me. It no longer felt like my home's dining space. It felt like something else entirely. A place where reality was being laid out piece by piece, stripped of emotion, stripped of denial, left only with facts. The next few days passed quietly on the surface, but underneath, everything was moving. Daniel called more frequently, checked in more often, his tone softer, more attentive, too attentive. "How are you feeling today, Mom?" he asked one morning. "I'm all right," I replied. "You sound tired," he said. I smiled faintly, even though he couldn't see it. "I didn't sleep well," I admitted, a small truth, wrapped around a much larger one. "You should really let us help you more," he said gently. "You don't have to do everything alone." There it was again. The offer, the positioning, the slow shift from suggestion to necessity. "I'll think about it," I said. He seemed satisfied with that. Not because it meant anything definite, but because it meant I wasn't resisting. That was all he needed. Permission didn't have to be explicit. It just had to be possible. That afternoon, they came over. Both of them, unannounced. I opened the door and saw it immediately. The performance. Daniel's concerned expression. Lindsay's soft, sympathetic smile. "Hey, Avery," Lindsay said, stepping inside before I fully moved aside. "We were in the area and thought we'd check on you." "Of course you did," I thought. "You didn't answer your phone earlier," Daniel added. "I was resting," I said calmly. He nodded, but his eyes scanned the room, always scanning, always looking, for what I wondered silently. They settled into the living room like they belonged there, like they had a claim. Lindsay glanced toward the desk, then back at me. "Have you been keeping up with everything?" she asked lightly. "Everything," I echoed. "You know," she said, gesturing vaguely. "Bills, paperwork, things like that." I let a small pause stretch between us. Then I sighed softly. "It's been a little overwhelming," I admitted. Again, not entirely untrue, just incomplete. Daniel leaned forward immediately. "That's exactly what we've been talking about," he said. "You shouldn't have to deal with all that stress." Stress, another carefully chosen word. "We can take some of that off your plate," Lindsay added. I nodded slowly. "That might be nice," I said. And just like that, I saw it. The shift, the subtle relaxation in their posture, the quiet satisfaction in their eyes. They thought they were getting closer, that their plan was working, that I was slipping. Later, while Lindsay helped me sort through a stack of papers in the kitchen, Daniel wandered into the living room, alone. I didn't follow him immediately. I didn't need to. The camera would. Still, I waited a few seconds, then stepped quietly into the hallway, just enough to see. He stood at the desk, the drawer slightly open, his hand resting on the edge, not moving, not yet, just considering. As if he was deciding how much he could take this time. I stepped back before he noticed, returned to the kitchen. Lindsay looked up. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yes," I said simply. A moment later, Daniel rejoined us. his expression unchanged, neutral, controlled, but I didn't need to see what he had done because I already knew. That night after they left, I checked the footage. There it was, clear as before. The drawer opening, the envelope, the counting, more money gone. But this time, there was something different. He didn't laugh. He didn't speak. He just took it. Efficient, confident, like it was routine, like it was his. I watched the clip twice, then a third time. Not because I needed to, but because I was looking for something, anything. A trace of hesitation, a flicker of doubt, a sign that somewhere inside him, there was still a line he wasn't willing to cross, but there wasn't. And that was the hardest part, because it meant this wasn't a mistake. It wasn't desperation. It wasn't even panic. It was choice. Deliberate, repeated, owned. I set the phone down slowly, and for the first time since this began, I didn't feel shock. I didn't feel confusion. I didn't even feel anger. I felt something else, something quieter, stronger, final, resolve. Because now there was no more waiting, no more wondering, no more hoping this would stop on its own. They weren't going to stop, which meant I had to, and I would. Just not in the way they expected. By the time Daniel made his move, I was already waiting for it. That's the strange thing about patterns. Once you see them, clearly you begin to recognize not just what is happening, but what will happen next. And Daniel had become predictable, not in his emotions, not in his tone, but in his direction. He wasn't circling anymore. He was closing in. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. The air was warm, the kind of early spring warmth that makes everything feel deceptively calm. I had just finished watering the plants in the backyard when I heard his car pull into the driveway. No call, no message, just arrival. I dried my hands slowly on a towel and walked inside. By the time I reached the living room, he was already there, standing near the window, looking out, like he was rehearsing something in his head. "Daniel," I said softly. He turned quickly, too quickly, like he hadn't expected me to be there yet. "Hey, Mom," he said, forcing a smile. "I didn't know you were coming," I replied. "Yeah, I was in the area," he said, the same line, the same tone, but this time there was something underneath it. Tension, purpose. "Sit with me for a minute," he asked, gesturing toward the couch. There it was. I nodded. Of course. We sat down, not side by side, facing each other. That mattered, because this wasn't casual. This was a conversation, a setup. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, hands clasped together. "I've been thinking a lot about you," he began. I almost smiled at that, not because it was sweet, but because it was practiced. "I'm right here," I said gently. He exhaled as if gathering the right words. "I want to make sure you're okay," he said. "I am," I replied. I know he said quickly, but sometimes it's hard to tell. There it was, the opening. "What do you mean?" I asked. He hesitated, not because he didn't know what to say, but because he was choosing how to say it. "Mom," he said, his voice softening, "you've seemed a little overwhelmed lately." I let my eyes drift downward for a moment, as if considering, as if unsure. "I suppose things have felt a bit heavier," I admitted. That was enough. I saw it immediately, the way his shoulders relaxed, the way his gaze steadied. Confirmation. "You don't have to carry everything by yourself," he said. "That's all I'm saying." I nodded slowly. "I understand." He leaned back slightly, studying me. "I've been looking into some options," he continued. "Just possibilities." "Options," I repeated. "Yeah," he said. "Places where you'd have more support, people around, less to worry about." There it was. "The next step." "You mean moving?" I asked. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he chose his words carefully. "Not necessarily right away," he said, "but maybe eventually." Eventually. A word designed to feel distant, safe, non-threatening. "And this house?" I asked quietly. He glanced around briefly, then back at me. "It's a lot to manage," he said. "You've done an amazing job, but it might be time to simplify." Simplify. Another word, soft, harmless on the surface, but underneath it meant letting go, of control, of ownership, of everything. I let silence settle between us, long enough to make him uncomfortable, long enough to make him push further. "Mom," he said, his tone shifting slightly, "this isn't about taking anything away from you. It's about helping you. Helping." I looked at him. Really looked. At the man sitting in front of me. And for a moment, just a moment, I saw the boy he used to be. The one who needed me. The one who trusted me. And then it was gone. Replaced by something else, something harder, something colder. I trust you, I said quietly. The words were deliberate, measured, a test. His reaction was immediate, relief, gratitude, and something else. Victory. You can, he said quickly. You always can, always. I nodded, then added, I just don't want to lose myself in the process. It was subtle, but it mattered. He leaned forward again. You won't, he said. I promise. Promises, another tool. I let out a small breath. Maybe we can talk more about it, I said. Of course, he replied, whenever you're ready. Ready. He stood up then as if the conversation had reached its intended point, but I knew better. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Lindsay arrived shortly after, right on cue. Her timing was never accidental. How did it go? She asked lightly, glancing between us. Daniel gave a small nod. We talked, he said. She smiled, too quickly, too confidently. That's good, she said. It's important to have these conversations. Conversations. As if this was mutual. As if this wasn't carefully orchestrated. We sat together for a while after that. Light conversation. Surface-level topics. But underneath, everything had changed. Because now the plan wasn't just implied. It had been introduced, placed on the table, waiting to be accepted, or rejected, or redirected. After they left, I didn't check the camera right away. I didn't need to. I already knew what I would find. Instead, I sat in the living room, alone. The house quiet around me. And I thought about what Rachel had said. Be ready, because this was the moment everything shifted. From preparation to execution. They weren't just testing anymore. They were moving. And that meant I had to move too. Not emotionally, not impulsively, but strategically. I reached for my phone, dialed Rachel. He started, I said, when she answered. Her voice remained steady. What did he say, I told her. Every word, every pause, every carefully chosen phrase. When I finished, she exhaled slowly. Good, she said. The word surprised me. Good, I repeated. Yes, she said, because now we know exactly where they're going. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me, and now I asked. There was a brief pause. Then now, she said, we let them believe they're winning. I closed my eyes, took a slow breath, and for the first time since Daniel sat across from me on that couch, I allowed myself to feel it. Not fear, not sadness, but something else entirely. Control. Because they thought they were guiding me toward a decision. They thought they were leading me, but they weren't. They were walking exactly where I needed them to go. And soon, very soon, they would realize that this wasn't their plan anymore. It was mine. The invitation felt ordinary on the surface. That was the point. Come for dinner this Sunday, I said to Daniel over the phone, my voice soft, almost hesitant. I thought it might be nice for all of us to sit together. There was a pause. Not long, but long enough. Yeah, he said finally. That sounds good. I'll make your favorite, I added. Pot roast. The way your father used to like it. That did it. I could hear the shift in his tone immediately. Warmth, nostalgia. Something that almost sounded like sincerity. Yeah, Mom, he said. We'll be there. We'll be there. Of course you will, I thought. Because you think this is your moment. After I hung up, I stood in the kitchen for a while, my hand still resting on the counter. Sunday. 2 days away. 2 days to prepare. Not just the food, but everything else. Rachel arrived that afternoon, not through the front door, through the side entrance, quiet, discreet. We sat at the dining table, the same table that had become something else entirely over the past few weeks. What's the plan? She asked. I took a slow breath. We bring them here, I said, all of them, Daniel, Lindsay. She nodded. Who else, Mia? I said. Rachel's expression softened slightly. She should be there, I added. She deserves to hear the truth. Rachel considered that. All right, she said. And the rest, Frank, I continued. And Pastor Elijah. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. The pastor, yes, I said. Daniel respects him. Or at least, he cares how he's seen in front of him. Rachel gave a small nod. Smart. This can't be just emotional, I said. It has to be witnessed. Understood, she replied. I hesitated for a moment. And you, I added. Rachel leaned back slightly. "You want me present?" "Yes," I said, "but not at the table." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "In the house," I clarified, "just not visible at first." A small smile touched her lips. "Waiting in the wings," she said. "Exactly." She nodded once. "All right," she said. "And when do you confront them?" I looked down at my hands for a moment, then back up. "Not immediately," I said. "Good," she replied. "I want them to feel comfortable," I continued, "to believe they're still in control." Rachel folded her arms. And then I met her gaze. "Then I take it away." Sunday came faster than I expected. Or maybe I just didn't notice the time passing. I woke early, cooked slowly, carefully. Every movement deliberate, every detail intentional. The pot roast simmered in the oven, filling the house with a familiar scent, one that carried memories I wasn't sure I was ready to revisit. George standing in the kitchen teasing me about using too much seasoning. Daniel as a boy sneaking bites before dinner was ready. For a moment I let myself feel it. The life that used to exist here. Then I let it go, because today wasn't about the past, it was about the truth. By 5 o'clock, everything was ready. The table set, the house quiet, the camera recording. Frank arrived first, right on time. He didn't say much when he walked in, just gave me a steady look. "You sure about this?" he asked. I nodded. "Yes." He held my gaze for a moment longer, then nodded back. "I'll stay close," he said. Pastor Elijah came next, warm, gentle, but with an awareness in his eyes that told me he understood this wasn't just a dinner invitation. "Whatever happens," he said softly as he stepped inside, "you're not alone." I smiled. "Thank you." Rachel arrived shortly after, through the side entrance again, silent, prepared, hidden, exactly as planned. And then, at precisely 5:30, Daniel and Lindsay arrived, together with Mia. I opened the door, and for a brief moment, everything looked normal. Daniel smiled. Lindsay's expression was soft. Mia gave me a small, quiet nod. "Hey, Mom," Daniel said, stepping forward. "Come in," I replied. They walked inside, unaware, unprepared, exactly as I needed them to be. Dinner began like any other. Plates passed. Small talk exchanged. Laughter light, controlled, careful. Daniel complimented the food. Lindsay asked polite questions. Mia stayed mostly quiet. Watching. Always watching. Frank and Pastor Elijah participated just enough to keep things balanced. Normal. That word again. Normal. But underneath it, tension, waiting, building. I could feel it in my chest. A steady pressure, not fear, not anymore. Something else. Anticipation. I let the conversation flow, let them relax, let them settle into the illusion that this was just a family dinner. Because the more comfortable they felt, the harder the truth would hit. Halfway through the meal, Daniel leaned back slightly, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "This is really good, Mom," he said. "Thank you," I replied. He glanced around the table, then back at me. "We should do this more often," he added. I smiled faintly. "Yes," I said, "we should." Then I set my fork down, gently, deliberately. I actually invited everyone here for a reason, I said. The room shifted, subtly but unmistakably. Daniel's posture straightened. Lindsay's smile faltered just for a second. Mia looked at me. Frank remained still. Pastor Elijah folded his hands quietly. And in that moment, everything became very, very clear. "What's going on?" Daniel asked. His tone was light, but there was tension underneath. I looked at him, really looked. Then I reached for my phone. "There's something I want you to hear," I said. Lindsay's eyes flickered. Just for a moment. Fear. Recognition. Daniel frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" he asked. I didn't answer. I didn't need to, because the moment had arrived, the point of no return. I tapped the screen, pressed play. And then his voice filled the room. Clear, undeniable. The old bat won't notice. The air changed instantly. Heavy, still, unforgiving. Daniel froze. Lindsay's face drained of color. Mia's hand tightened around the edge of the table. No one spoke. No one moved. Because in that moment, there was nowhere left to hide. The silence after the recording began was louder than anything I had ever heard. It pressed in from every direction, thick, suffocating, undeniable. Daniel's voice echoed through the room, no longer softened by distance or misunderstanding. It was raw now, exposed. Each word landing exactly as it had been spoken. "The old bat won't notice." I didn't look at him right away. I watched the others first. Mia's face crumpled almost instantly, her eyes filling with tears she tried and failed to hold back. Pastor Elijah sat still, his expression shifting from confusion to something deeper, something heavier. Frank's jaw tightened, his gaze locked on Daniel with quiet, controlled anger. And Lindsay didn't move. She didn't react, at least not outwardly. But I saw it. The flicker, the calculation, the moment she realized this wasn't a conversation she could control. The recording continued. The drawer, the money, their voices low, deliberate, unmistakable. And then, silence. I let it linger. I didn't rush to fill it, because sometimes the truth needs space to settle, to sink in, to become real. Finally, Daniel spoke. That's not he started, then stopped. His voice sounded different, not confident, not rehearsed, unsteady. That's not what it looks like, he said louder this time. I turned to him slowly. Then what does it look like, Daniel? I asked. My voice was calm, steady, but underneath it, there was something else, something final. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, searching for words, for an explanation, for anything that could reshape what had already been seen. It's just taken out of context, he said finally. Context. The word felt almost absurd. You were in my house, I said, in my living room, taking money from my drawer. I was borrowing it, he said quickly. Borrowing. Lindsay shifted beside him. Her hand moved slightly, just enough to create distance between them. Not obvious, but intentional. You didn't tell me, I continued. I was going to, he replied when I asked. He didn't answer, because there was no answer that would hold. This isn't just one time, I said. His eyes flickered. Just for a second, that's the only time he insisted. No, I said quietly. And then I reached for my phone again, tapped, played another clip, this one shorter, simpler but just as clear. Daniel, opening the drawer, counting, taking, no words this time. Just action, routine, familiar, his face drained of color. That doesn't prove anything he said, but the conviction was gone. It proves enough. Frank said, his voice low and controlled. Daniel turned toward him. You don't understand, he began. No, Frank interrupted. I understand exactly what I'm looking at. The room shifted again. Not just tension now, exposure. Lindsay stood up suddenly. This is ridiculous, she said. You're making this into something it's not. I looked at her. Then tell me what it is, I said. She hesitated. Just long enough. Daniel made a mistake, she said finally. That doesn't mean mistake, I repeated. The word felt too small, too light. For months, I asked. Her eyes snapped to mine. That was the first real crack. What are you talking about, she said. I held her gaze. Do you want me to play more, I asked. Silence. Heavy, final, because now they both knew. This wasn't a single moment. This wasn't something they could explain away. This was a pattern, a plan, and it had been seen. Fully, completely. Mia let out a quiet sob. Why, she asked. The word cut through everything. Sharp, simple, devastating. Daniel looked at her, and for a moment, just a moment, I saw something real in his expression. Not guilt, not yet, but something close. We were just trying to help, he said. Help. The same word, again and again. How is this helping? Mia asked, her voice breaking. He didn't answer. Because he couldn't. Because there was no version of this, no explanation that would make sense. That's not all, I said quietly. Daniel's head snapped toward me. What do you mean, he asked. I held his gaze. I know about the paperwork, I said. His expression shifted. Fear. Real fear. I know about the questions you've been asking, I continued. About legal control, about my accounts. That's not, he started. It is, I said, firm, unwavering, and I know what you were planning, I added. Lindsay stepped forward. This is insane, she said. You're twisting everything, am I asked. Then I turned the phone again. Another recording. This one different. Voices lower, more deliberate. Lindsay's voice. If she can't manage things anymore, Daniel's. How would we prove that? The room went still, again. But this time there was no denial, no confusion, no space left for interpretation. Mia covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking. Oh my God, she whispered. Daniel didn't move, didn't speak, because now there was nothing left to say. Lindsay looked at him, and in that moment, everything changed. The partnership, the unity, the shared plan, it fractured, instantly. I didn't mean it like that, she said quickly. You took that out of context. You said it, I replied. I was just talking, she insisted. Danielle was the one actually doing things. There it was, the shift, the turn, the betrayal. Daniel's head snapped toward her. What he said, "I'm not taking the blame for this," she said. "You're the one who took the money." "You were right there," he shot back. "I didn't touch anything," she replied. "But you planned it," he said. "And you agreed." She fired back. The room filled with their voices, sharp, desperate, accusing, each word pulling them further apart, further away from whatever unity they thought they had. I didn't interrupt. I didn't need to. Because this was the truth revealing itself, without control, without filters, without lies strong enough to hold it together. Finally, enough. The word came from Pastor Elijah, quiet but powerful. The room fell silent again. He looked at Daniel, then at Lindsay. "This isn't about misunderstanding," he said. "This is about choices." Neither of them responded, because they couldn't, because the choices had already been made, and now they were being seen, clearly, completely, irreversibly. I took a slow breath, and for the first time since this began, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not grief, but clarity. Because now there was nothing left to uncover, nothing left to prove, only one thing left to decide: what came next. For a moment after Pastor Elijah spoke, no one said anything. It was as if the room itself had reached a limit, like it couldn't hold any more noise, any more excuses, any more unraveling. And in that silence, something shifted. Not in them, in me. Because up until this point, I had been reacting, watching, gathering, enduring. But now it was time to decide. Daniel was the first to move. He stood up slowly, his chair scraping lightly against the floor. "This is being blown out of proportion," he said. His voice had changed again. Not unsteady this time. Not defensive. Something else. Something harder. Like he was trying to reclaim control. "It's money," he continued. "That's all this is. Money." I looked at him. "Is it?" I asked. "Yes," he said quickly. "We needed help, and you had more than enough." The words landed heavily. Not because they were loud, but because they were honest. Honest in a way that stripped away every last layer of pretense. "So you took it," I said. "I was going to pay it back," he replied. When I asked again, he hesitated. "Just for a second. Then that's not the point," he said. "Of course it wasn't. Because the point wasn't repayment, it was entitlement. You think you're the only one who struggled." He went on, his voice rising slightly. "Do you have any idea what it was like growing up in this house?" The question caught me off guard. Not because I didn't expect anger, but because I didn't expect this. "What do you mean?" I asked. He let out a sharp breath. "Everything was always about control," he said. "Dad's rules, Dad's expectations. Everything had to be perfect." I felt something tighten in my chest. "That's not true," I said quietly. "It is," he insisted. "You just didn't see it." The word stung. Because there was a part of me, a small, quiet part, that wondered if there was something I had missed. Something I hadn't understood. But even if there was, even if there had been mistakes that didn't justify this, pain doesn't give permission. You think this fixes that? I asked. He didn't answer. Because he couldn't. Because there was no connection between what he was saying and what he had done. Only justification. Only rationalization. "I worked my whole life," I continued. "Your father worked his whole life. Everything in this house, everything we built was for you, and now it should stay in the family," he shot back. The words hung in the air, clear, unfiltered, final. There it was. Not desperation, not confusion, belief. A belief that what was mine was already his. That I was just standing in the way of something inevitable. I felt something inside me settle. Not break, settle. Because now there was no more question. No more wondering if he understood. He did. He just didn't care. Lindsay stepped forward, then her voice sharper now. "This isn't just about him," she said. "We're both dealing with things you don't understand." I turned to her. "Then help me understand," I said. She hesitated. "Just for a moment, then we have debts," she said, "real ones, and no one's helping us. So you decided to take from me," I said. "It's not taking," she replied quickly. "It's family." "Family?" The word felt almost unrecognizable in her mouth. "Family doesn't do this," Mia said suddenly. Her voice was small, but it cut through everything. Both Daniel and Lindsay turned toward her. Daniel began. "No," she said, shaking her head. "Don't." Her eyes were filled with tears, but her voice didn't break. "You don't get to act like this is normal," she said. "It's not." Daniel's expression softened slightly. "Mia, you don't understand. I understand enough," she said. "I understand that you lied, and you kept lying." Silence. Again. But different this time, because now the truth wasn't just coming from me, it was coming from her, and that made it harder to dismiss, harder to twist, harder to escape. Rachel stepped into the room then, quietly, but with presence. Daniel's head turned sharply. "What is she doing here?" he asked. Rachel didn't answer immediately. She walked forward slowly, calm, composed, then stopped beside the table. "I'm here because this situation requires clarity," she said. Her voice was steady, professional, unshakable. Daniel looked between us. "This is ridiculous," he said. "You called a lawyer." "Yes," I said. The word was simple, but it carried everything behind it. All the evidence, all the preparation, all the decisions I had made. Lindsay's posture shifted, subtly but noticeably. "What does that mean?" she asked. Rachel met her gaze. "It means," she said, "that this is no longer just a family discussion." Daniel let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "You're serious," he said. "Yes," Rachel replied. "And what exactly are you going to do?" he asked. I answered that. "I'm going to protect myself," I said. The room went still. Again. But this time there was no confusion, no misunderstanding, only reality. "You're really going to do this?" Daniel asked. There it was. Not anger, not denial, but something else, something closer to disbelief. Like he had never truly considered that I would push back, that I would choose myself. "Yes," I said. The word didn't shake, it didn't waver, it didn't soften. It simply existed, and that was enough. Because in that moment, everything changed. Not the past, not what they had done, but what came next. Daniel stared at me for a long moment, searching for hesitation, for doubt, for anything that might suggest this wasn't real. He didn't find it, because it wasn't there. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, something in his expression shifted, not to understanding, not to remorse, but to realization that this, all of it, was no longer in his control. And for the first time since this began, neither was I. The room didn't explode after I said it. It didn't shatter into chaos or collapse into shouting the way I once imagined it might. Instead, it settled, heavy, final. Like something had been decided long before the words were spoken, and now we were just acknowledging it. Daniel stared at me. Not with anger, not at first, with disbelief. "You're serious," he said quietly. "I am," I replied. The simplicity of it seemed to unsettle him more than anything else, because there was no space left to argue with something so clear. Lindsay stepped in quickly, her voice rising. "You can't do this," she said. "This is your son." I looked at her. "I know exactly who he is," I said. The words didn't come out sharp. They came out steady. And that made them land harder. "You're overreacting," she continued. "This is a misunderstanding that got out of hand." "No," Rachel said calmly. "It's not." Lindsay turned toward her. "You don't get to decide," that she snapped. Rachel didn't move. "I don't have to," she replied. "The evidence already has." That shut her down. Not completely, but enough. Because this wasn't a conversation she could control anymore. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, pacing slightly now. "So what he said. You're going to call the police. Ruin everything over this? Everything." The word echoed, as if everything hadn't already been broken. "This didn't ruin anything," I said quietly. "You did." He stopped, turned toward me, and for the first time there was anger, real sharp. "You think you're perfect?" he shot back. "You think you didn't make mistakes?" I did, I said. The admission seemed to catch him off guard. "I made plenty," I continued, "but I never treated you like something to take from." The words hung in the air. Not loud, not dramatic, just true. And truth has a way of cutting deeper than anything else. Lindsay stepped forward again, her tone shifting, more desperate now. "This doesn't have to go that far," she said. "We can fix this." Fix. Another word that had lost its meaning. How I asked. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Because there was no answer. Because there was no version of this that could be undone with a conversation. "You don't understand what this will do." She tried again. To Mia. To all of us. I glanced at Mia. She was standing now, not beside them, beside me. That alone said everything. She understands more than you think I said. Mia's hand brushed lightly against mine, a small gesture, but it grounded me, reminded me. Not everything had been lost. Daniel followed my gaze. His expression shifted again. This time, there was something closer to panic. "Mia," he said, his voice softening. "Come here," she didn't move. "Come on," he said again. "No," she replied. The word was quiet, but it didn't waver. "I'm staying here." The impact of that moment was immediate. Daniel's shoulders dropped slightly, as if something inside him had just slipped out of reach. "You don't know what you're doing," he said. Mia shook her head. "I do," she said. "I'm choosing. The words settled in the room like a verdict, because that was what this had become, a series of choices, and now everyone was making theirs. Rachel stepped forward slightly. "We should be clear about what happens next," she said. Daniel let out a sharp laugh. "Oh, I'm sure you've got that all planned out," he said. "Yes," she replied simply. "No hesitation, no emotion, just certainty. We will be filing formal claims regarding unauthorized access to funds and attempted financial coercion," she continued. "There will also be documentation submitted to prevent any future legal attempts to establish control over Miss Bennett's assets." The words were precise, measured, unavoidable. Daniel stared at her, then at me. "You're really going through with this," he said. "Yes," I replied. Again, no change, no softness, just truth. He looked around the room, at Frank, at Pastor Elijah, at Mia, and finally, back at me. "This is how you end things?" he asked. I felt the weight of that question, because in some ways, yes, it was, but not in the way he meant. "I didn't end this," I said. "You did." Silence. One last time. But this time, it didn't feel heavy. It felt clear, like the air after a storm. Still, but no longer suffocating. Lindsay grabbed her purse abruptly. "This is insane," she muttered. "We're leaving." Daniel didn't move right away. He stood there, frozen between something he couldn't fix and something he couldn't control. "Come on," Lindsay said sharply. He hesitated, just for a moment, then turned and followed her. The door opened, closed, and just like that, they were gone. The house fell quiet, not empty, not broken, just still. I stood there for a moment, my body catching up to everything that had just happened. My hands trembled slightly. My chest felt tight, but underneath it all, there was something else, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. Not because it was over, but because it had finally been said. Out loud, clearly, without denial, without distortion. Frank stepped closer. "You did the right thing," he said. I nodded. Even though it didn't feel like something that could be measured that way. Right, wrong, it just was. Pastor Elijah placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "This kind of strength," he said softly, "doesn't come easy." "No," I replied, "it doesn't." Mia stayed beside me, quiet, present. And that mattered more than anything, because even as one part of my life had just closed, another part, unexpected, unplanned, was still there, still standing. And maybe, just maybe, that was where healing would begin. The house felt different the next morning. Not quieter, not emptier, just honest. For the first time in a long while, I walked through each room without that lingering sense that something unseen was shifting behind me. There were no careful glances, no second-guessing my own memory, no quiet tension sitting in the corners like it had been waiting for something to happen. Because it already had. And now, there was nothing left to hide from. I made my coffee the same way I always had, 2 spoons of sugar, a splash of cream. I stood by the kitchen window watching the early light settle across the backyard George once loved so much. The tomatoes hadn't been planted yet this season, but I could already picture where they would go. Some habits don't disappear. They adapt. Mia came by later that morning, not secretly this time, not cautiously. She knocked once, then let herself in. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey, sweetheart," I replied. She stepped into the kitchen, looking around like she was seeing the space differently. "Is it weird?" she asked. What I said, everything she replied, after yesterday. I considered that for a moment. "Yes," I said honestly, but not in a bad way. She nodded slowly. "I didn't sleep much," she admitted. "Neither did I said. We sat at the table together. No pressure, no expectations, just presence. "Are they going to be okay?" she asked after a moment. I knew who she meant, and I knew there wasn't a simple answer. "They'll have to face what they've done," I said carefully. "That doesn't mean they won't be okay." She looked down at her hands. I don't want to hate them, she said. I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. You don't have to, I said gently. Understanding what someone did doesn't mean you have to carry anger for it forever. She looked up at me. Then what do I do? I smiled softly. You decide what kind of person you want to be, I said. Not based on what they did, but based on what you believe is right. She nodded, slowly, like the words were settling into place, and I could see it. The difference between her and them. She was still choosing, still thinking, still open, and that mattered. More than anything, over the next few weeks, life didn't return to what it was before. It couldn't. Some things once seen clearly don't go back to being invisible, but it did become something new. Rachel handled everything with precision. Accounts were secured, documents updated, legal steps initiated quietly, firmly, without unnecessary drama. There were calls, messages, attempts from Daniel to reach out, some apologetic, some defensive, some confused. I didn't respond right away, not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood something I hadn't allowed myself to before. Love doesn't require access. And forgiveness, if it ever comes, doesn't require proximity. Frank checked in regularly, never intrusive, just present, the kind of presence that doesn't ask for anything in return. Pastor Elijah stopped by one afternoon with a small bag of seeds. Thought you might be ready to plant again, he said with a gentle smile. I took them, thankful, because in a way, that was exactly what this was. Planting something new, not to replace what was lost, but to grow beyond it. Mia became part of my daily life in a way I hadn't expected. She came over after school, helped in the kitchen, sat with me in the evenings, sometimes talking, sometimes just existing in the same space. One afternoon, we stood together in the backyard, our hands in the soil as we planted the first rows of tomatoes. This is where Grandpa used to stand, right? She asked. Yes, I said. She smiled slightly. I think he'd like this, she said. I nodded. I think so too. The will was the hardest part. Not because of what I changed, but because of what it meant. I sat with Rachel in her office, the same place where everything had begun to shift weeks earlier. You're sure about this? She asked. Yes, I said. My voice didn't waver, because this wasn't about punishment. It wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity, about making decisions based on truth, not obligation. Some of what had once been intended for Daniel would now go toward Mia's future. Education, support, opportunity, and part of it, a portion that felt deeply right, would go towards something else, a local organization that supported elderly individuals facing financial exploitation. Because I had learned something I couldn't ignore. This wasn't rare, it wasn't unusual, it just wasn't always seen. And maybe, if my experience could help someone else see it sooner, then it wouldn't be wasted. That night, I sat alone in the living room. The same room where everything had unraveled, the same room where truth had finally been spoken. I looked around, at the walls, the furniture, the small details that had once felt heavy with memory, and for the first time, they didn't feel like weight. They felt like foundation, because this house, this life was still mine, not because no one had tried to take it, but because I had chosen to protect it. And that choice, that clarity, that strength, it didn't come from anger. It didn't come from fear. It came from something much simpler, something quieter, self-respect. I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes for a moment, and let the silence settle. Not heavy, not empty, just peaceful. Because in the end, this wasn't about proving anything to anyone else. It was about remembering something for myself. That age is not weakness. That trust is not blindness. And that sometimes being underestimated is the very thing that gives you the power to see everything clearly. After everything I went through, there's one thing I want to leave you with. Sometimes the people we trust the most are the ones we never expect to question. And when that trust breaks, it doesn't always happen loudly. It happens quietly through small actions, subtle words, things that don't feel right but are easy to ignore. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. Don't ignore those feelings. Pay attention, protect yourself, and understand that setting boundaries, even with family, is not betrayal. It's self-respect. And self-respect is something no one should ever take from you. If you've ever been in a situation where you felt taken advantage of, I'd really like to hear your story. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? Leave a comment and share your thoughts. And if this story meant something to you, if it made you think or feel or see something more clearly, consider subscribing and staying with me. Because sometimes the stories we share are the ones that help someone else find their strength too.